To a master of Metallikato, the coming of this episode must have felt like it was in slow motion. For our first Patreon-sponsored episode of 2019, supporter David O'Hara has requested the basics on Decepticon martial artist and agent of chaos, Bludgeon. Released in 1989, the original Bludgeon toy was a pretender, a transformer who concealed his true robotic form inside a biomechanical outer shell. His small inner robot transformed into a tank, and his shell took the memorable form of a samurai skeleton. Bludgeon's profile described him as a merciless, emotionless master of the Cybertronian martial art known as Metallikato. Introduced in the waning years of the original toy line, Bludgeon could well have faded into obscurity like most of the new toy characters released the same year, had it not been for his role in the Marvel comic book, which turned him into a fan favourite for years to come. The comic built upon his samurai motif, arming him with a katana sword and adding a dash of mysticism to the character, establishing him as a practitioner of dark arts who lived by a twisted warrior's code. Bludgeon debuted in the UK version of the comic, appearing in one of the most memorable stories of the era as a member of the Decepticon elite combat unit, the Mayhem Attack Squad, hunting down Decepticon traitors Carnivac and Catilla. Writer Simon Furman latched onto Bludgeon right away, and soon after, when he began working on the US version of the comic, he continued to make prominent use of the character, promoting Bludgeon first to leader of the Mayhem Attack Squad, and then, in the final few issues of the series, to leader of the entire Decepticon army, reinvigorating them after their decimation by Unicron. Furman would even continue Bludgeon's story into the sequel comic book Transformers Generation 2, in which Megatron returned to retake leadership and swiftly decapitated Bludgeon when he refused to relinquish command. It was a bit of an ignominious end to Bludgeon's tenure as leader, and 20 years later, when Furman revisited the Marvel Universe in his 2013 series Regeneration 1, he penned an alternate fate for him. In this version of events, Bludgeon experienced a vision of his approaching death and launched an all-out attack on Cybertron as a way to go out in a blaze of glory. But fate didn't unfold the way he expected. He was defeated by Autobot leader Rodimus Prime, who specifically chose to spare his life in order to deny him the glorious warrior's death he desired. But Bludgeon's exploits on the comic page haven't just been confined to the Marvel Universe. A clear favourite of Furman's, he was frequently featured in the various new Transformers comics that the writer worked on in the decades between these Marvel adventures, in stories with increased emphasis on Bludgeon's mystical tendencies and his obsession with the forces of darkness and chaos. The 2003 Dreamwave Productions comic, War Within: The Dark Ages, followed a pre-Pretender Bludgeon, as his studies of the arcane arts and quest for dark power led him to serve the Fallen, evil member of the original 13 Primes. Concurrently, Dreamwave's Transformers Armada comic featured him as one of the dimension-hopping heralds of the ultimate Chaos Bringer, Unicron himself. A few years later, in 2006, Bludgeon was introduced into IDW Publishing's comics as the main villain of the Stormbringer miniseries, in which he resurrected the monstrous Decepticon Thunderwing, the inventor of Pretender technology. Bludgeon sought to use Thunderwing and his tech to destroy other planets, believing the sacrifice would mystically restore life to the dead Cybertron. But in his hubris, he wound up trapping himself inside a malfunctioning Pretender shell. Even after Furman's run on IDW's comics ended, Bludgeon would remain a recurring antagonist for years to come, ever seeking to ravage the universe in the name of restoring Cybertron to glory. He served the mad scientists Giaxus and Shockwave, and even Unicron, and had several confrontations with the Dinobots, who would ultimately be the ones to end his threat for good. But despite Bludgeon's continued prominent role in all these different comics, it took a long time before his popularity translated into a return to toy store shelves. In the 20 years that followed the release of his original toy, the only other figure released by Hasbro bearing the Bludgeon name was in the 2001 Robots in Disguise toy line, a yellow Megatron recolor with no profile or personality to connect him to the original. Years later, this toy would be repurposed by the Transformers Collectors Club to represent a version of Bludgeon from the mirror universe of Shattered Glass, where he was a heroic cowboy rather than an evil samurai. Bludgeon toys based on the original character were proposed for both the Unicron Trilogy and Titanium series toy lines, but neither came to pass. The Unicron Trilogy design would be used as inspiration for Bludgeon's look in IDW's comics instead. It wouldn't be until 2009 that Bludgeon made his grand return, when the Revenge of the Fallen toy line introduced a new incarnation of the character for the live-action movie universe. 2 figures were released. The first was just a recolor of the 2007 Decepticon Wreckage, in a color scheme that evoked the original Bludgeon's inner robot. But the second was a brand new toy, also based on the shelved Unicron Trilogy design, that finally fulfilled fans' long-held desires, transforming from a tank into a robot cast in the appearance of his classic skeletal Pretender shell, complete with a pair of samurai swords. It was in this form that Bludgeon featured in various pieces of ancillary movie media. Most notably, he appeared in animation for the first time, battling Ironhide in the online Cyber Missions cartoon shorts, and he took on a prominent role in the United Kingdom's Revenge of the Fallen comic, with Simon Furman once again writing the character as the leader of his own breakaway faction of Decepticons. Ever since Revenge of the Fallen, Bludgeon has remained high profile enough to continue appearing in multiple Transformers toy and merchandise lines, both at mass retail and as convention and club exclusives, but he hasn't had much luck when it comes to showing up in media. A version of the character reimagined as a pirate instead of a samurai was considered for, but ultimately didn't appear in Transformers Animated. More traditional versions of Bludgeon were released as part of the Transformers Prime toy line in 2013, and the new Robots in Disguise toy line in 2017, but neither made it into the accompanying animated series. Though an Autobot recolor of Bludgeon, named Blastwave, did show up in the Robots in Disguise cartoon. Strangely, a Minicon also named Bludgeon was part of the Robots in Disguise toy line as well, and he also managed to make a brief appearance in the cartoon. The most recent Bludgeon figure was released as part of the Power of the Primes toy line in 2018. This tiny Bludgeon was the first since the original to function as a Pretender, with a shell that opened to reveal the Prime Master robot Quintus Prime. As a sword-wielding martial artist, Bludgeon's name has always been a rather ill-fitting one, but the Power of the Primes toy gave it new meaning as the shell itself transformed into a kanabo, a samurai war club that could be wielded by larger figures, which allowed the skeletal Decepticon to live up to his name as a blunt instrument. Though the one true path of Metallikato has yet to lead Bludgeon to our TV screens, nevertheless, he remains the preeminent example of a character from the latter days of Generation 1 who owes the popularity he garnered in the Marvel comic for his continued presence in Transformers today. And those are the basics on Bludgeon. Thanks to David for sponsoring this episode. Share your thoughts on Old Skullface in the comments, and do the like and subscribe thing while you're down there. And if you can, please consider supporting the series on Patreon, where you will have the chance to sponsor episodes of your own, just like this one.